Welcome to the Hour of Empowerment. Today we are in Season 4, Topic 2, Strategic Thinking to Lead Change. Before we proceed, I would like to summarize what we talked about last week. Last week we told you that we are in the final stage of the show program. We promised 4 seasons when we began this program, and now we are in the final season. And we are gathering your feedback. So if you have feedback, we would like to hear about it, because we're gonna use that feedback to redesign this program or come up with a new program. We need your feedback about what did you learn because of this program, which topic you liked the most. We liked all the topics, but personally, which one do you like the most? If you are asked to just pick one of them, which topic do you choose among the topics that we have covered so far? Which interviewees? We had great interviewees, but if you choose 3 of them, whom do you choose? Because we may re-invite 3 of them, or at least one of the interviewees. Tell us also about our strengths and also the areas we need to improve, because your constructive feedback gonna help us as we design the program. We have 4 options for you. The first one is, we appreciate if you come to our studio. If you are in the metro area or visiting this area, come in our studio and briefly provide us some feedback. We're gonna give you some questions. You can prepare on those questions. You can come here and provide us your feedback. If you are not in the metro area, you can still give us your feedback through Google Hangouts. And also, if you want, you can leave a voice message, 571-305-1637. You can also send us email at assegid@gmail.com. We look forward to hear from you. We need your feedback because we're gonna air some of your feedbacks in the last couple of the episodes before we conclude this program. We also re-invite one of the interviewees based on your choice, and also we're gonna summarize your feedback, the feedback that we have been receiving, and present to you, and also show you what we are planning to do, even give you the glimpse of the coming program. Today, let's go back to our discussion. We are in Season 3, and we're going to talk about change models. Last week, one of the discussions we had was about the need for you to develop strategic planning skills. We discussed about the skills you need to be a great strategist. Remember that when we discussed about the 9 cardinal building blocks for you to succeed in your leadership, strategizing is one of the cardinal building blocks. But having the skills of strategizing by itself is not enough. We need to have some tools to brainstorm and strategize to our future. And last week we gave you some tools. What are those 4 tools we discussed last week? SWOT, mind map, futures wheel, and scenario planning. I would like to quickly summarize what we discussed about these 4 tools. The first tool was SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You can use this tool to brainstorm and identify these 4 quadrants and strategize accordingly. You can use your strengths, tap into your strengths, find out ways to compensate your weaknesses, and also use the opportunities that are available, and also prepare yourself to overcome the threats, the challenges. And also we had a mini exercise and we assumed that a for-profit organization, we called it Company X. Their revenue was declining, and the leadership, they wanted to strategize to increase their revenue. And we used SWOT very briefly to show you how that organization could be able to use SWOT and strategize to increase their profit. We also talked about futures wheel. At the center, you have a change, decision, trend, or event. And then you brainstorm to identify the first order consequences, the second order, the third order, and so on and so forth. You ask a series of what-if questions and exhaust and brainstorm and strategize. We had also a mini exercise. We assumed that a government agency, a research organization, was tasked to come up with a vaccination for HIV/AIDS. As you know, it takes years to come up with a vaccination for this kind of tough diseases. Now, the leadership of that research agency should use, for example, one of the tools. And we assume that this organization is planning to use futures wheel. And at the center, what was the center? The decision, which is producing a vaccination. And we try to come up with some first order consequences, second order consequences. We didn't finish it, but I showed you how to use futures wheel for this kind of strategizing. We also talked about mind map. And mind map, at the center, you have a decision, an interest, what have you, and then you select some categories and brainstorm using mind map. In our mini exercise, we decided that you wanted to have a personal plan for yourself for 2015. And at the center, that's you, 2015, and we selected 4 categories: your health, relationships, finance, and education. You want to improve your health, your relationships, your finances, and education. And we briefly discussed about how to use mind map to strategize for your personal plan for 2015. I hope that you're going to use this tool before the end of December and practice it. Use it. If you have any question, let me know. We also talked about scenario planning, and the emphasis was rather than just strategizing for one future, you should have 4 alternative futures, and primarily you strategize for the most probable future scenario, but you also consider the 3 alternative futures. In our mini exercise, we assume that me as a facilitator, you guys are the leadership of one of the opposition parties in Ethiopia. And the leadership of that political party is trying to bring democracy, justice, and the rule of law in Ethiopia, and they are interested to use scenario planning to come up with a 20-year strategic document. And we briefly discussed about how, first, that leadership should identify the driving forces in that industry, in that political situation in Ethiopia, and the restraining forces. Then, select one of the dominant driving forces and one of the dominant restraining forces and cross them, and you have like 4 scenarios. And then you decide which of the scenarios, the future is going to be the most probable one. You imagine, you project yourself into the future and create that future, narrate it with 500 words or 1,000 words, and strategize for that future, to create that future. But I have some disclaimers. Yes, we had that mini exercise chances, but in real world, as I have been facilitating before strategic sessions, I want to tell you that this kind of facilitative sessions, they are very interactive. The facilitator, like myself, could be a consultant, a coach, or a trainer. That person is just at the center trying to help the participants, the key players, the key stakeholders to come up with a strategic document. So the participants, the decision makers, are the one who decide the topic, the title, the amount of time they want to brainstorm, and the kind of final product they want to have. So the role of the facilitator is asking the right questions to help them specify things, to help them come up with strong suggestions, feasible and relevant options. Other than that, the facilitator doesn't have any bigger role than facilitating, helping the group to remain within the scope, helping the group to come up with more alternative solutions and suggestions by asking the right questions. And also remember, when you have this kind of strategic sessions, it may take hours, even days. For example, in the case of scenario planning, it may take 3 days, 5 days, and so on and so forth. So what I did was I tried to show you how to use these tools. Otherwise, in real world, it's very different. It may take hours and days. Most importantly, the final product, your strategic document, it should be live and active. It doesn't mean that you just come up with a strategic plan for the coming 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, and that's it. No, you should not shelf it. It should be an active document. You have to revise it again and again. Remember, you may come up with a strategy and you work on it, you implement on it, and you may find out that it's not working. What you should do? You should change it. Because remember, planning is half of the duty you have. The remaining is implementing and monitoring it. So it's live and active. You should monitor it. You should change it all the time. And also, remember, you should always revisit your strategies. That's why I showed you the life cycle of how I come up with my own personal and my organization's strategic planned documents. First, I always revise the long-term strategy, and then the short-term, the quarterly, the yearly first, and then the quarterly, the monthly, and weekly when I strategize and plan for one day. I always go back. So you should always revise your strategic document. For example, if you want to come up with a 1-year strategic plan, you have to sit down, first summarize and revise your strategic document for long term. For example, for the case of the scenario planning we discussed, let's say that that opposition party came up with a 20-year strategic document. Let's say that it could be able to be the Ethiopian people change the government, and democracy, justice, and the rule of law could be able to be achieved, let's say, in 2 years, in 3 years, or in 5 years. Now, that strategic document is irrelevant. What you should do, you should revise it, and now the agendas should change from establishing democracy, justice, and the rule of law. Now, there is justice, there is a rule of law. The second step is establishing institutions that foster democracy, justice, and the rule of law. And also setting up infrastructures, systems that help to bring development, sustainable development. And also rally your people, including people in the diaspora, bringing back people to the country, and also creating win-win partnership regionally and globally. So you have a strategic document, let's say, for the coming 10 years or 20 years, but on the ground, things may change fast. Likewise, you have to change fast. You have to change your strategic document and reorganize, regroup yourself to have another agenda, another goal, another objective. That being said, I would like to briefly talk about the importance of change and how can you use models, change models, to brainstorm and successfully initiate, implement, and sustain change. As you know, the 21st century is filled with rapid change. Yes, change has been there since the beginning of our history. The difference is that change now happens more frequently, and we should be pro-change. We need to adapt change, and we should be great change agents. For that, we need to be always in the side of change and even proactively initiate change. The question is, what happens if we don't want to change? You know, change is very difficult. Recently, I moved. I changed my residence. It was very hard to change, but I was forced. There were reasons why I should change. Because if I don't change, there were prices. Likewise, in your life, in your organization, there are things you don't want to change, but if you don't change, there are prices. Remember the discussion we had 2 weeks ago. We talked about how, for example, if you don't change the oil of your car, what happens to the engine of your car? You know, it breaks down and it costs you lots of money, time, energy. What happens if your blood is not refreshed daily? Your body gonna be sick. And you know what happens. So it's very important to be pro-change and proactive about change and enjoy the benefit that comes with change. But change is a process. You can't just change. You can't just make it a one-day party. You have to plan for it. You have to know about how change works. It's a process, but to understand that process, to effectively initiate and implement sustain change, you should know the process, and models are there for this kind of purpose. I mean, you have to understand these models and use them to prepare yourself to successfully implement change and sustain change. But you have to know that there is no one perfect model. There is no. And also you have to know that you can use multiple models to successfully understand change and implement it successfully. There are 3 common change models I would like to share with you today. The first one is Lewis's change management model, and the second one is Kotter 8 steps model, John Kotter's 8 steps of change, and also Bridges transitional model. Let's first discuss about what kind of thing we should know about models. Now, the first thing you should know is how many phases or steps or stages are there in that model. And also, who are the key players under each phase, under each stage, and the activities, you know, in that particular phase, and your role as a leader of that change, and the roles of other stakeholders. These are very important information. Now, let's briefly talk about Lewis's change management model. As you can see from the picture, there are 3 phases. The first phase is unfreeze, and the second is change, and the third is refreeze. Now, let's briefly talk about unfreeze. Now, you want to change an ice cube, a square ice cube, into a cone-shaped ice cube. What are some of the things you should do? For example, in the case of unfreezing phase, the first phase of that change. What do you think should be some of the steps you should take in that phase? For example, you should consult all stakeholders. There were people when you had that square-shaped ice. So these people should be consulted, and they should be clear about why you are changing from a square ice cube into cone ice cube. And also you should explain to them, show them the vision, why you need the cone-shaped ice cube, and you solicit their support to be part of the change. The second one is change phase. It is actually the phase where the change happens. Now, You had a square ice cube, you unfreezed it. It's shapeless. But now you have to shape it. You have to change it into a cone shape. What are some of the tasks do you think you should have in this phase? Changing the shape into cone. You have, let's say, you unfreezed the square ice cube. Now it's water. Maybe you need to put that water into a cone-shaped equipment so that, the water at the end of the day change into a cubed shape. So this is the phase where you take action, series of actions. And also you engage and motivate others to involve in this change process. I'm giving you a metaphor. Otherwise, change is not like solid like this one, like square, cube. No, change rather is fluid. But I'm trying to give you this metaphor so that you understand how the process of change works. Now, the last phase is refreezing. That means you unfreeze the square ice cube, you change it into cone-shaped ice cube. Now you are in the refreezing, which means once you have the shape, you have to refreeze it. You have to cement that change so that it doesn't, fall apart. Likewise, once you implement change, you have to sustain it. You have to cement the change that you achieved in the previous phase. So this is very important. And this is a change sustaining phase. And change is not yet over. Even if you implemented your change, you have to work on your change, make sure that it sustains. Another model is Bridges transitional model. As you can see from the model, there are 3 stages. The first one is ending the status quo. And also the second one is neutral zone. This is the zone where the change happens. And the last one is launching into a new beginning. Let me briefly talk about the first phase, which is ending phase, which means at this stage, you want to end the status quo. You want to stop what you have been doing. So this is the phase where you have to prepare yourself to let go of the past. It's very difficult, very challenging, but what are some of the tasks you should do at this phase? Here are some of the tasks. First, you have to communicate the change. You let your people know that you are changing. One of the challenges of change agents, leaders, is that they just implement change. They just send email or post on their notice board about the change and thinking that people will jump around and say, hey, let's go for it. That's not the case. You have to communicate with your people. You have to convince them why you should let go of this and change this. They have to buy into your change agenda. And the ending phase is the phase that you rally your stakeholders. That is the phase where you analyze your losses and your gains and explain to your people and show them that you have a great thing ahead of you and change is very important for them personally and for the organization. You have to give them something to envision, something big out of that change, and they should buy into that change. You should have also a plan about how you implement the change. The second phase is the neutral phase. This is actually where you implement the change. This is a bridge between the old way of doing things into a new way of doing things. It's very important. You have to motivate people. What other tasks do you think you should have under this neutral zone? Yes, things like motivating your people, engaging them, and also find out creative ways, innovative ways of doing that new thing so that people develop confidence about that new change and also deliver some results. So people should be convinced that they don't need to return back into the past because the new change is good. They have to embrace it. The last phase is launching into the new beginning. Yes, you have already implemented the change. Remember, throughout these 3 phases, you have some portion of the others. For example, in the ending phase, you have some people who have already bought into your change agenda. There are people even implementing that change agenda. While you are in the neutral zone, there are people still thinking about the past. But there are also people ahead. So also in the new beginning case, there are people still sticking about the past. They don't want to change. And there are people who want to change, the majority of them. Or there are some who are still in the implementation phase. Let me take you back to the model. So as you can see, in the ending phase, as you can see, the majority of the bulk of that phase is the ending phase. But you have a little bit of the neutral zone, a little bit of the new beginning. The same way at the center, in the neutral zone, you have the bulk of the neutral zone, but you have a little bit of ending and also a little bit of the new beginning. The same way in the end, yes, the bulk is the beginning, the launching into the new beginning, but you have a little bit of a neutral zone and also a little bit of ending phase. In that launching into the new phase, what are some of the things you should do? You implemented the change, you want to sustain it, you want to cement it. What you should do? Give incentives and also celebrate and reward people who contributed for that success. But change is not yet done. You have to continue to do and deliver great results. The last and the third model is Kotter's 8 steps model. In this model, as you can see, there are 8 steps. Sense of urgency, guiding coalition, vision, communicating the vision, empowering others, short-term wins, consolidating improvements, and also institutionalize. As you can see, you have to generate a sense of urgency before you begin implementing change. You remember in 2008, all of the candidates for the United States presidency, they advocated change. But what was the difference between President Obama and the other candidates? Because Obama could be able to show the sense of urgency of implementing change. Otherwise, all of them, they promoted change. They say, we're going to change Washington, we're going to change this and that. But somehow, Obama could be able to convince voters at that time that change is urgent. And that's why they voted for him. But the question is, among his change agendas, how many of them are still in the ending or in the unfreezing phase? How many of his agendas, change agendas, are in the neutral zone or in the change phase? And which ones are in the unfreezing or the new beginning phase? Let me just give you one example. Of course, some of his change agendas are still stuck in the beginning of that change model. But let's take Obamacare. In the case of Obamacare, if you remember, he promoted it, he advocated it, and so on. So it was the unfreezing phase. He showed how we gain from the new health care system, and he showed how the previous health care system was broke. And finally, he got the vote of the Congress and the Senate, and he implemented it. If you remember last year, it was the neutral zone. It was the change phase because we were given deadlines to have our own health insurance if we don't have with our organizations. That was the implementation phase, the neutral zone. We are now in the refreezing or in the new beginning phase. Whether this change sustains or not, still it's not 100% sure. There are some factors that may revert it back. So that change agenda is in the last phase of change, but it's not yet over. What if Republicans could be able to revert it? What if some systems or some approach failed and the government could not be able to continue to implement this healthcare system? We don't know. So there are things to do to continue this change, to sustain and endure. I just gave you one example, but there are change agendas that failed already in the first phase or in the second phase. Likewise, we need to evaluate. Personally and organizationally, there are some change agendas we failed. There are some change agendas we succeeded. And there are change agendas still we need to work on. That is the main message from these models. Now, the assignment I'm going to give you is sit down and list all those change agendas of yours and your organization and identify their phase. Where are they right now? What kind of things you should do to take them to the next level? As you can see, there are lists of steps. I don't have time to go through, but they are very important to follow. One interesting thing about these three models is that they overlap. For example, the ending phase of the bridge transitional model is almost similar to the unfreeze phase of Lewis's change management and sense of urgency, guiding coalition and vision of John Kotter's 8 steps change model, and so on and so forth. In conclusion, yes, we need to buy into change. We need to change, but the problem is change's pace is quickened in the 21st century. We should be smart enough to embrace some models and practice our change agendas based on these models. Because change is a process. To understand that process, we need to be masterful in using models. That's why we discussed about these three important change models. What are these three change models we have discussed so far? Lewis's change management model, Bridges transitional model, and John Kotter's 8-step model. Now we have seen under each model, we have seen the different things, the different activities, the different roles we should have, and it's very important. Our understanding of each model depends on the following important factors. That means we should be able to identify the key players under each phase, the activities we should engage with, and our roles and the roles of all stakeholders. Finally, I would like to remind you that we are looking for your feedback. We want you, if possible, you're busy, we know that. If possible, we want you to come to in our studio and give us your feedback. And also, if you couldn't be able to do that, if you are not in the metro area, we suggest that you can give us your feedback through Google Hangouts, or you can leave a voice message through 571-305-0637. And also, you can send us email at assegidh@gmail.com. Thank you very much for watching. Next week, we're going to have a very great interview. An interview with a great strategist and planner. Stay tuned. Thank you.